Hello, welcome to the Short Story Workshop. My name's Matt Bowles. I'm here with Melody Bowles and Simone King. This week we are going to be reading and discussing Nelly's Hospital by Louisa May Alcott. Mel, you picked the story, so why don't you tell us a little bit about it?
So this story was written by Louisa May Alcott, who spent some time as a nurse during the American Civil War, and I think she wrote this story to try and help children understand what maybe their fathers or big brothers were going through during that time. And I liked that she looked at it from a new perspective. Haven't seen many stories like it before.
Okay, cool. And we should say, just in case you are unfamiliar, she's the author of Little Women, which you have probably heard of. Okay, so here it is. Here is Nelly's Hospital by Louisa May Alcott.
Nelly sat beside her mother picking lint, but while her fingers flew, her eyes often looked wistfully out into the meadow, golden with buttercups and bright with sunshine. Presently she said, rather bashfully, but very earnestly, "Mamma, I want to tell you a little plan I've made, if you'll please not laugh." "I think I can safely promise that, my dear," said her mother, putting down her work that she might listen quite respectfully. Nelly looked pleased, and went on confidingly, "Since Brother Will came home with his lame foot, and I've helped you tend him, I've heard a great deal about hospitals, and I liked it very much. Today I said I wanted to go and be a nurse, like Aunt Mercy, but Will laughed and told me I'd better begin by nursing sick birds and butterflies and pussies before I tried to take care of men. I did not like to be made fun of, but I've been thinking that it would be very pleasant to have a little hospital all my own and be a nurse in it, because if I took pains, so many pretty creatures might be made well, perhaps. Could I, mamma?" Her mother wanted to smile at the idea, but did not, for Nelly looked up with her heart and eyes so full of tender compassion, both for the unknown men for whom her little hands had done their best, and for the smaller sufferers nearer home, that she stroked the shining head and answered readily, "Yes, Nelly, it will be a proper charity for such a young Samaritan, and you may learn much if you are in earnest. You must study how to feed and nurse your little patients, else your pity will do no good, and your hospital become a prison. I will help you, and Tony shall be your surgeon."
"Oh, mamma, how good you always are to me! Indeed, I am in truly earnest. I will learn, I will be kind, and may I go now and begin?" "You may, but tell me first, where will you have your hospital?" "In my room, mamma. It is so snug and sunny, and I never should forget it there," said Nelly. "You must not forget it anywhere. I think that plan will not do. How would you like to find caterpillars walking in your bed, to hear sick pussies mewing in the night, to have beetles clinging to your clothes, or see mice, bugs, and birds tumbling downstairs whenever the door was open?" said her mother. Nelly laughed at that thought a minute, then clapped her hands and cried, "Let us have the old summer house. My doves only use the upper part, and it would be so like Frank in the story book. Please say yes again, mamma." Her mother did say yes, and snatching up her hat, Nelly ran to find Tony, the gardener's son, a pleasant lad of 12, who was Nelly's favourite playmate. Tony pronounced the plan a jolly one, and leaving his work followed his young mistress to the summer house, for she could not wait 1 minute. "What must we do first?" she asked, as they stood looking in at the dusty room full of garden tools, bags of seed, old flower pots, and watering cans. "Clear out the rubbish, miss," answered Tony. "Here it goes, then," and Nelly began bundling everything out in such haste that she broke 2 flower pots, scattered all the squash seeds, and brought a pile of rakes and hoes clattering down about her ears. "Just wait a bit and let me take the lead, miss. You hand me things, I'll pile 'em in the barrow and wheel 'em off to the barn, then it will save time and be finished up tidy." Nelly did as he advised, and very soon nothing but dust remained. "What next?" she asked, not knowing in the least. "I'll sweep up while you see if Polly can come and scrub the room out. It ought to be done before you stay here, let alone the patients." "So it had," said Nelly, looking very wise all of a sudden. "Will says the wards, that means the rooms, Tony, are scrubbed every day or two, and kept very clean and well venty something. I can't say it, but it means having a plenty of air come in. I can clean windows while Polly mops, and then we shall soon be done." Away she ran, feeling very busy and important. Polly came, and very soon the room looked like another place. The 4 latticed windows were set wide open, so the sunshine came dancing through the vines that grew outside, and curious roses peeped in to see what frolic was afoot. The walls shone white again, for not a spider dared to stay. The wide seat which encircled the room was dustless now, the floor as nice as willing hands could make it, and the south wind blew away all musty odours with its fragrant breath. "How fine it looks!" cried Nelly, dancing on the doorstep, lest a footprint should mar the steel-damp floor. "I'd almost like to feel sick for the sake of staying here," said Tony admiringly. "Now what sort of beds are you going to have, miss?" "I suppose it won't do to put butterflies and toads and worms into beds like the real soldiers where Will was," answered Nelly, looking anxious. Tony could hardly help shouting at the idea, but, rather than trouble his little mistress, he said very soberly, "I'm afraid they wouldn't lay easy, not being used to it. Tucking up a butterfly would about kill him. The worms would be apt to get lost among the bedclothes, and the toads would tumble out the first thing. I shall have to ask Mamma about it." "What will you do while I'm gone?" said Nelly, unwilling that a moment should be lost. "I'll make frames for nettings to the windows, else the doves will come in and eat up the sick people." "I think they will know that it is a hospital, and be too kind to hurt or frighten their neighbours," began Nelly, but as she spoke a plump white dove walked in, looked about with its red-ringed eyes, and quietly pecked up a tiny bug that had just ventured out from the crack where it had taken refuge when the deluge came. "Yes, we must have the nettings. I'll ask Mamma for some lace," said Nelly, when she saw that, and taking her pet dove on her shoulder, told it about her hospital as she went toward the house, for, loving all little creatures as she did, it grieved her to have any harm befall even the least or plainest of them. She had a sweet child fancy that her playmates understood her language as she did theirs, and that birds, flowers, animals, and insects felt for her the same affection which she felt for them. Love always makes friends, and nothing seemed to fear the gentle child, but welcomed her like a little sun who shone alike on all, and never suffered an eclipse. She was gone some time, and when she came back her mind was full of new plans, one hand full of rushes, the other of books, while her head floated the lace and a bright green ribbon hung across her arm. "Mamma says that the best beds will be little baskets, boxes, cages, and any sort of thing that suits the patients, for each will need different care and food and medicine. I have not baskets enough, so, as I cannot have pretty white beds, I am going to braid pretty green nests for my patients, and while I do it, Mamma thought you'd read to me the pages she has marked, so that we may begin right." "Yes, miss, I like that, but what is the ribbon for?" asked Tony. "Oh, that's for you. Will says that if you are to be an army surgeon you must have a green band on your arm, so I got this to tie on when we play hospital." Tony let her decorate the sleeve of his grey jacket, and when the nettings were done the welcome books were opened and enjoyed. It was a happy time, sitting in the sunshine, with leaves pleasantly astir all about them, doves cooing overhead, and flowers sweetly gossiping together through the summer afternoon. Nelly wove her smooth green rushes. Tony pored over his pages, and both found something better than fairy legends in the family histories of insects, birds, and beasts. All manner of wonders appeared, and were explained to them, till Nelly felt as if a new world had been given her, so full of beauty, interest, and pleasure, that she never could be tired of studying it. Many of these things were not strange to Tony, because, born among plants, he had grown up with them as if they were brothers and sisters, and the sturdy brown-faced boy had learned many lessons which no poet or philosopher could have taught him, unless he had become as childlike as himself, and studied from the great same book. When the baskets were done, the marked pages all read, and the sun began to draw his rosy curtains around him before smiling good night, Nelly arranged the green beds around the room, Tony put in the screens, and the hospital was ready. The little nurse was so excited that she could hardly eat her supper, and directly afterwards ran up to tell Will how well she had succeeded with the first part of her enterprise. Now brother Will was a brave young officer, who had fought stoutly and done his duty like a man, but when lying weak and wounded at home, the cheerful courage which had led him safely through many dangers seemed to have deserted him, and he was often gloomy, sad, or fretful, because he longed to be at his post again, and time passed very slowly. This troubled his mother, and made Nelly wonder why he found lying in a pleasant room so much harder than fighting battles or making weary marches. Anything that interested and amused him was very welcome, and when Nelly, climbing on the arm of his sofa, told her plan, mishaps, and successes, he laughed out more heartily than he had done for many a day, and his thin face began to twinkle with fun as it used to do so long ago. That pleased Nelly, and she chatted like any affectionate little magpie, till Will was really interested, for when one is ill, small things amuse. "Do you expect your patients to come to you, Nelly?" he asked. "No, I shall go and look for them. I often see poor things suffering in the garden and the wood, and always feel as if they ought to be taken care of, as people are. You won't like to carry insane bugs, lame toads, and convulsive kittens in your hands, and they would not stay on a stretcher if you had one. You should have an ambulance, and a branch of the Sanitary Commission," said Will. Nelly had often heard the words, but did not quite understand what they meant. So Will told her of that great never-failing charity, to which thousands owe their lives, and the child listened with lips apart, eyes often full, and so much love and admiration in her heart that she could find no words in which to tell it. When her brother paused, she said earnestly, "Yes, I will be a sanitary. This little cart of mine shall be my ambulance, and I'll never let my water barrels go empty, never drive too fast, or be rough with my poor passengers, like some of the men you tell me about. Does this look like an ambulance, Will?" "Not a bit, but it shall if you and mamma like to help me. I want 4 long bits of cane, a square of white cloth, some pieces of thin wood, and the gun pot," said Will, sitting up to examine the little cart, feeling like a boy again as he took out his knife and began to whittle. Upstairs and downstairs ran Nelly, till all necessary materials were collected, and almost breathlessly she watched her brother arch the canes over the cart, cover them with the cloth, and fit an upper shelf of small compartments, each lined with cotton wool to serve as beds for wounded insects, lest they should hurt one another or jostle out. The lower part was left free for any larger creatures which Nelly might find. Among her toys she had a tiny cask which only needed a peg to be watertight. This was filled and fitted in before, because, as the small sufferers needed no seats, there was no place for it behind, and as Nelly was both horse and driver, it was more convenient in front. On each side of it stood a box of stores. In one were minute rollers, as bandages are called, a few bottles not yet filled, and a Weedle's jar of cold cream, because Nelly could not feel that her outfit was complete without a medicine chest. The other box was full of crumbs, bits of sugar, birdseed, and grains of wheat and corn, lest any famished stranger should die for want of food before she got it home. Then mamma painted U.S. San Com in bright letters on the cover, and Nelly received her charitable plaything with a long sigh of satisfaction. "9 o'clock already! Bless me, what a short evening this has been!" exclaimed Will, as Nelly came to give him her good-night kiss. "And such a happy one!" she answered. "Thank you very, very much, dear Will. I only wish my little ambulance was big enough for you to go in. I'd so like to give you the first ride." "Nothing I should like better if it were possible, though I've a prejudice against ambulances in general, but as I cannot ride, I'll try and hop out to your hospital to-morrow, and see how you get on," which was a great deal for Captain Will to say, because he had been too listless to leave his sofa for several days. That promise sent Nelly happily away to bed, only stopping to pop her head out of the window to see if it was likely to be a fair day to-morrow, and to tell Tony about the new plan as he passed below. "Where shall you go to look for your first load of sick folks, miss?" he asked. "All round the garden first, then through the grove, and home across the brook. Do you think I can find any patients so?" said Nelly. "I know you will. Good night, miss," said Tony. And Tony walked away with a merry look on his face that Nelly would not have understood if she had seen it. Up rose the sun, bright and early, and up rose Nurse Nelly almost as early and as bright. Breakfast was taken in a great hurry, and before the dew was off the grass this branch of the S.C. was all astir. Papa, mamma, big brother and baby sister, men and maids, all looked out to see the funny little ambulance depart, and nowhere in all the summer fields was there a happier child than Nelly as she went smiling down the garden path, where tall flowers kissed her as she passed, and every blithe bird seemed singing a "good speed." "How I wonder what I shall find first," she thought, looking sharply on all sides as she went. Crickets chirped, grasshoppers leaped, ants worked busily at their subterranean houses, spiders spun shining webs from twig to twig, bees were coming for their bags of gold, and butterflies had just begun their holiday. A large white one alighted on the top of the ambulance, walked over the inscription as if spelling it letter by letter, then floated away from flower to flower, like one carrying the good news far and wide. "Now everyone will know about the hospital, and be glad to see me coming," thought Nelly. And indeed it seemed so, for just then a blackbird sitting on a garden wall burst out with a song full of musical joy. Nelly's kitten came running after to stare at the wagon and rub her soft side against it. Bright-eyed Toad looked out from his cool bower among the lily leaves, and at that minute Nelly found her first patient. In one of the dewy cobwebs hanging from a shrub near by sat a fat black and yellow spider, watching a fly whose delicate wings were just caught in the net. The poor fly buzzed pitifully, and struggled so hard that the whole web shook, but the more he struggled the more he entangled himself, and the fierce spider was preparing to descend that it might weave a shroud about its prey, when a little finger broke the threads and lifted the fly safely into the palm of a hand, where he lay faintly humming his thanks. Nelly had heard much about contrabands, knew who they were, and was very much interested in them, so when she freed the poor black fly, she played he was her contraband, and felt glad that her first patient was one that needed help so much. Carefully brushing away as much of the web as she could, she left small Pompey, as she named him, to free his own legs, lest her clumsy fingers should hurt him. Then she laid him in one of the soft beds with a grain or two of sugar if he needed refreshment, and bade him rest and recover from his fright, remembering that he was at liberty to fly away whenever he liked, because she had no wish to make a slave of him. Feeling very happy over this new friend, Nelly went on singing softly as he walked, and presently she found a pretty caterpillar dressed in brown fur, although the day was warm. He lay so still she thought him dead, till he rolled himself into a ball as she touched him. "I think you are either faint from the heat of this thick coat of yours, or that you are going to make a cocoon of yourself, Mr. Fuzz," said Nelly. "Now I want to see you turn into a butterfly, so I shall take you. If you get lively again, I will let you go. I shall play that you have given out on a march, as the soldiers sometimes do, and been left behind for the sanitary people to see to." In went sulky Mr. Fuzz, and on trundled the ambulance till a golden green rose beetle was discovered, lying on his back, kicking as if in a fit. "Dear me, what shall I do for him?" thought Nelly. "He acts as baby did when she was so ill, and mamma put her in a warm bath. I haven't got my little tub here, or any hot water, and I'm afraid the beetle would not like it if I had. Perhaps he has pain in his stomach. I'll turn him over and pat his back, as nurse does babies when she cries for pain like that." She set the beetle on his legs, and did her best to comfort him, but he was evidently in great distress, for he could not walk, and instead of lifting his emerald overcoat and spreading the wings that lay underneath, be turned over again, and kicked more violently than before. Not knowing what to do, Nelly put him into one of her soft nests, for Tony to cure if possible. She found no more patients in the garden except a dead bee, which she wrapped in a leaf and took home to bury. When she came to the grove, it was so green and cool she longed to sit and listen to the whisper of the pines, and watch the larch tassels wave in the wind. But, recollecting her charitable errand, she went rustling along the pleasant path till she came to another patient, over which she stood considering several minutes before she could decide whether it was best to take it to her hospital, because it was a little grey snake with a bruised tail. She knew it would not hurt her, yet she was afraid of it. She thought it pretty, yet could not like it. She pitied its pain, yet shrunk from helping it, for it had a fiery eye and a keen quivering tongue that looked as if longing to bite. "He is a rebel. I wonder if I ought to be good to him," thought Nelly, watching the reptile writhe with pain. "Will said there were many sick rebels in his hospital, and one was very kind to him. It says, too, in my little book, 'Love your enemies.' I think snakes are mine, but I guess I'll try and love him, because God made him. Some boy will kill him if I leave him here, and then perhaps his mother will be very sad about it. Come, poor worm, I wish to help you, so be patient and don't frighten me." Then Nelly laid her little handkerchief on the ground, and with a stick gently lifted the wounded snake upon it, and folding it together laid it in the ambulance. She was thoughtful after that, and so busy puzzling her young head about the duty of loving those who hate us, and being kind to those who were disagreeable or unkind, that she went through the rest of the wood quite forgetful of her work. A soft "quick, quick" made her look up and listen. The sound came from the long meadow grass, and bending it carefully back, she found a half-fledged bird, with one wing trailing on the ground, and its eyes dim with pain or hunger. "You darling thing, did you fall out of your nest and hurt your wing?" cried Nelly, looking up into the single tree that stood near by. No nest was to be seen, no parent birds hovered overhead, and little Robin could only tell its troubles in that mournful "queek, queek, queek." Nelly ran to get both her chests, and sitting down beside the bird, tried to feed it. To her joy it ate crumb after crumb, as if it were half starved, and soon fluttered nearer a confiding fearlessness that made her very proud. Soon baby Robin seemed quite comfortable. His eye brightened, he queeked no more, and but for the drooping wing would have been himself again. With one of her bandages Nelly bound both wings closely to his sides, for fear he should hurt himself by trying to fly, and though he seemed amazed at her proceedings, he behaved very well, only staring at her and ruffling up his few feathers in a funny way that made her laugh. Then she had to discover some way of accommodating her two larger patients, so that neither should hurt nor alarm the other. A bright thought came to her after much pondering. Carefully lifting the handkerchief, she pinned the two ends to the roof of the cart, and there swung little Forked Tongue, while Rob lay easily below. By this time Nelly began to wonder how it happened that she found so many more injured things than ever before, but it never entered her innocent head that Tony had searched the wood and meadow before she was up, and laid most of these creatures ready to her hands, that she might not be disappointed. She had not yet lost her faith in fairies, so she fancied they too belonged to her small sisterhood, and presently it did really seem impossible to doubt that the good folk had been at work. Coming to the bridge that crossed the brook, she stopped a moment to watch the water ripple over the bright pebbles, the ferns bend down to drink, and the funny tadpoles frolic in quieter nooks where the sun shone and the dragonflies swung among the rushes. When Nelly turned to go on, her blue eyes opened wide, and the handle of the ambulance dropped with a noise that caused a stout frog to skip into the water heels overhead. Directly in the middle of the bridge was a pretty green tent, made of 2 tall burdock leaves. The stems were stuck into cracks between the boards, the tips were pinned together with a thorn, and one great buttercup nodded in the doorway like a sleepy sentinel. Nelly stared and smiled, listened, and looked about on every side. Nothing was seen but the quiet meadow and the shady grove, nothing was heard but the babble of the brook and the cheery music of the bobolinks. "Yes," said Nelly softly to herself, "that is a fairy tent, and in it I may find a baby elf sick with whooping cough or scarlet fever. How splendid it would be! Only I could never nurse such a dainty thing." Stooping eagerly, she peered over the buttercup's drowsy head, and saw what seemed a tiny cock of hay. She had no time to feel disappointed, for the haycock began to stir, and looking nearer, she beheld 2 silvery grey mites, who wagged wee tails, and stretched themselves as if they had just waked up. Nelly knew that they were young field mice, and rejoiced over them, feeling rather relieved that no fairy had appeared, though she still believed them to have had a hand in the matter. "I shall call the mice my babies in the wood, because they are lost, and covered up with leaves," said Nelly, as she laid them in her snuggest bed, where they nestled close together, and fell fast asleep again. Being very anxious to get home, that she might tell her adventures and show how great was the need of a sanitary commission in that region, Nelly marched proudly up the avenue, and having displayed her load, hurried to the hospital, where another applicant was waiting for her. On the step of the door lay a large turtle with one claw gone, and on his back was pasted a bit of paper with his name, Commodore Waddle, U.S.N. Nelly knew this was a joke of Will's, but welcomed the ancient mariner, and called Tony to help her get him in. All that morning they were very busy settling the newcomers, for both people and books had to be consulted before they could decide what diet and treatment was best for each. The winged contraband had taken Nelly at her word, and flown away on the journey home. Little Rob was put in a large cage where he could use his legs, yet not injure his lame wing. Fork-tongue lay under a wire cover on sprigs of fennel, for the gardener said that snakes were fond of it. The babes in the wood were put to bed in one of the rush baskets under a cotton wool coverlet. Greenback, the beetle, found ease for his unknown aches in the warm heart of a rose, where he sunned himself all day. The Commodore was made happy in a tub of water, grass and stones, and Mr. Fuzz was put in a well-ventilated glass box to decide whether he would be a cocoon or not. Tony had not been idle while his mistress was away, and he showed her the hospital garden he had made close by, in which were cabbage, nettle, and mignonette plants for the butterflies, flowering herbs for the bees, chickweed and hemp for the birds, catnip for the pussies, and plenty of room left for whatever other patients might need. In the afternoon, while Nelly did her task at lint-picking, talking busily to Will as she worked and interesting him in her affairs, Tony cleared a pretty spot in the grove for the burying ground, and made ready some small bits of slate on which to write the names of those who died. He did not have it ready an hour too soon, for at sunset 2 little graves were needed, and Nurse Nelly shed tender tears for her first losses, as she laid the motherless mice in one smooth hollow, and the grey-coated rebel in the other. She had learned to care for him already, and when she found him dead, was very glad she had been kind to him, hoping that he knew it, and died happier in her hospital than all alone in the shadowy wood. The rest of Nelly's patients prospered, and of the many added afterward few died, because of Tony's skilful treatment and her own faithful care. Every morning when the day proved fair, the little ambulance went out upon its charitable errand. Every afternoon Nelly worked for the human sufferers whom she loved, and every evening Brother Will read aloud to her from useful books, showed her wonders with his microscope, or prescribed remedies for the patients, whom he soon knew by name, and took much interest in. It was Nelly's holiday, but though she studied no lessons, she learned much, and unconsciously made her pretty play both an example and a rebuke for others. At first it seemed a childish pastime, and people laughed, but there was something in the familiar words sanitary, hospital, ambulance, that made them pleasant sounds to many ears. As reports of Nelly's work went through the neighbourhood, other children came to see and copy her design. Rough lads looked ashamed when in her wards they found harmless creatures hurt by them, and going out they said among themselves, "We won't stone birds, chase butterflies, and drown the girls' little cats any more, though we won't tell them so." And most of the lads kept their word so well that people said there never had been so many birds before as all that summer haunted wood and field. Tender-hearted playmates brought their pets to be cured. Even busy farmers had a friendly word for the small charity, which reminded them so sweetly of the great one which should never be forgotten. Lonely mothers sometimes looked out with wet eyes as the little ambulance went by, recalling thoughts or absent sons who might be journeying painfully to some far-off hospital, where brave women waited to tend them with hands as willing, hearts as tender, as those the gentle child gave to her self-appointed task. At home the charm worked also. No more idle days for Nelly, or fretful ones for Will, because the little sister would not neglect the helpless creatures so dependent upon her, and the big brother was ashamed to complain after watching the patience of these lesser sufferers, and merrily said he would try to bear his own wound as quietly and bravely as the Commodore bore his. Nelly never knew how much good she had done Captain Will till he went away again in the early autumn. Then he thanked her for it, and though she cried for joy and sorrow she never forgot it, because he left something behind him which always pleasantly reminded her of the double success her little hospital had won. When Will was gone, and she had prayed softly in her heart that God would keep him safe and bring him home again, she dried her tears and went away to find comfort in the place where he had spent so many happy hours with her. She had not been there before that day, and when she reached the door she stood quite still, and wanted very much to cry again, for something beautiful had happened. She had often asked Will for a motto for her hospital, and he had promised to find her one. She thought he had forgotten it, but even in the hurry of that busy day he had found time to do more than keep his word, while Nelly sat indoors, lovingly brightening the tarnished buttons on the blue coat that had seen so many battles. Above the roof, where the doves cooed in the sun, now rustled a white flag with the golden SC shining on it as the wind tossed it to and fro. Below, on the smooth panel of the door, a skilful pencil had drawn two arching ferns, in whose soft shadow, poised upon a mushroom, stood a little figure of Nurse Nelly, and underneath it another of Dr. Tony bottling medicine, with spectacles upon his nose. Both hands of the miniature Nelly were outstretched, as if beckoning to a train of insects, birds and beasts, which was so long that it had not only circled round the lower rim of this fine sketch, but dwindled in the distance to mere dots and lines. Such merry conceits as one found there! A mouse bringing the tail it lost in some cruel trap, a dor-bug with a shade over its eyes, an invalid butterfly carried in a tiny litter by long-legged spiders, a fat frog with gouty feet hopping upon crutches, Jenny Wren sobbing in a nice handkerchief as she brought dear dead Cock Robin to be restored to life. Rabbits, lambs, cats, calves, and turtles all came trooping up to be healed by the benevolent little maid who welcomed them so heartily. Nelly laughed at these comical mites till the tears ran down her cheeks, and thought she never could be tired of looking at them, but presently she saw 4 lines clearly printed underneath her picture, and her childish face grew sweetly serious as she read the words of a great poet, which Will had made both compliment and motto. He prayeth best who loveth best, all things both great and small, for the dear God who loveth us, he made and loveth all.
What were our first impressions of this story? Who wants to start?
My first impressions of this story were, I don't know how this is going to work. Yeah, so the main character, Nelly, her brother is home from the war and he's been hurt, and she says she wants to be a nurse. So he kind of makes a joke about, haha, you'd better go and rescue some insects and kittens first, okay? So she decides that she's going to do that, and everybody kind of indulges her. She's kind of sickeningly sweet as a character, but I understand kind of why, and I liked that it was a new way to look at this thing that would have happened to a lot of children. They would have had family members going off to war, coming home injured, not really understand what's wrong with them. Maybe they'd want to help them in some way. And though the story is quite silly and twee, it is about her trying to bond with her brother and help him feel a bit better, even though she can't obviously mend whatever's happened to him. She can make him laugh by doing this silly thing where she's running around rescuing insects.
Yeah, I kind of saw it the same way. Most of the content of the story is kind of silly and just kind of sweet. It has these serious themes in it as well.
Yeah, it's kind of using the child's game to talk about the undercurrent of her brother's recovery and the larger need for healing, I guess, within the society at that time. Also, children just make animal hospitals, so it doesn't kind of feel forced.
Do they?
We did, yeah. When I was a kid, at least, we always used to try and play animal vets and Animal Club, I think it was called, where we looked after animals.
I never had this experience.
Really? Okay, I thought it was like a standard childhood experience, but apparently not.
Okay, well maybe it is, and I just didn't, I don't know, get it for some reason. Huh. I hope that it is, because then that means the story is like more applicable to the current day as well. And that would be cool. The fact that something kids did back then is still something that they do now is just like, huh, nice.
Yeah, I mean, it resonated for me at least. I mean, we weren't so sickly sweet, but like, I remember the feelings vividly of learning that actually you can't feed ladybirds flower petals. You have to give them, I think, aphids?
Aphids.
Aphids, yeah. You can tell it's been a long time since I've been out in wildlife.
I mean, I saw that on TV, so I'm pretty sure I didn't have a clue what ladybirds ate until then.
But yeah, I guess my impressions were this is a story that comes from a good-hearted place, and that's why I like it.
Yeah, I mean, I found it a bit mediocre. Like, I'll probably forget about it, but in the grand scheme of short stories. But it was an enjoyable enough read, but it won't stick with me.
It's this kind of story that's easy to like, but hard to love, maybe.
Perhaps it would be more lovable if you were like Nelly's age.
Yeah, I mean, it is a children's story.
Maybe.
It's like, if you remember, there always used to be all those Animal Arc books as well, which was essentially little girl taking care of animals.
I loved those books. I had so many of them.
I think it's very resonant to a particular age group, and I could not read those books now. I don't understand why I was so obsessed with them at the time, but I was, and I think this speaks to that particular phase. So I appreciate that Alcott remembered it so well. Like, she's got a good handle on childhood, I think.
I think she wrote stories for the child of one of her friends, so she had live audience feedback. She was kind of in tune with what little girls like to read about. Little Women was intended to be a children's story.
I love Little Women, though.
Yeah, but when she wrote it, they said, "Can you write a story for girls?" And she's like, "I don't know how to do that." And then she wrote Little Women, and everyone was like, "Well, clearly you do."
But it's not just for girls, though. Like, I think it's very universally beloved and has universal appeal.
Yeah, it does. It has massive crossover appeal for all ages and people.
You can see that especially with the adaptations.
Yeah. I guess the story is so focused that it doesn't really have that.
So we mentioned that we thought that the story was a bit forgettable, so easy to like, difficult to love. Do we feel that one of the reasons behind this is the lack of conflict within the novel? I mean, within the story, and do we agree that the story has a lack of conflict?
I feel like it's a very happy, upbeat story, and because of that, it feels like nothing can go wrong. And for me, that makes it less interesting and kind of made it, it's a nice story, but it didn't really capture my intention as perhaps something more dramatic would.
It's got very dark undercurrents.
Has it, though?
Wasn't there a bit where it basically says that the animals are hurt because her doctor goes rampaging through the woods in case she's disappointed that there's nothing for the hospital?
Yeah.
Well, no. I don't think he went out and beat up a bunch of animals.
No, he found them and put them in her path, but it was implied that a lot of the other neighbourhood children, for example, might hurt little girls' kittens or beat up a snake for fun and that kind of thing. So I do think it does have a darker edge beneath the queeness.
Yeah, okay. I can see that part of it.
And the larger story going on is that she's helping her brother's recovery from something completely traumatic. And the story does kind of highlight that when she says at the end that the brother's preoccupation with her silly things helped him deal with the much larger things that the story doesn't address. A more adult reader, or perhaps a contemporary reader, would have understood
because of the context and the tensions going on at the time.
But it's still such a weird structure to me for a story to just have your main character say, I'm going to do this thing, and then they just do it, and that's the end of the story.
I mean, she had to clean out the shed. I mean, I agree with you on the lack of conflict. I think it's one of the reasons that I will not remember it. I don't think it has an inherent significant conflict at the heart of it.
It doesn't. It's all in the background.
Like, there's no point of urgency. I guess there's slight things of, will the animals make it? I got slightly nervous that she was going to accidentally end up slaughtering a bunch of animals because she was careless and wanted to play nurse, but you know.
I thought that they might end up accidentally doing something like that to one of the patients. I guess I initially thought it might take a darker path.
Yeah. The mice end up eaten because she puts them in the same room as a snake.
A darker lesson on life. Because they make a point of how like innocent the character is and how everybody indulges her and lets her do whatever she wants.
I mean, I was going to say they do make a point though of showing how that she is being educated to do it the right way. For example, by her parents or her brother going, actually, no, you can't just do this, or her friend going, you can't just put animals in beds like this and treat them like they're human because they're not. So you need to be careful of the specific needs of the animal you are treating. And they do show in the story her taking the time to learn and educate herself, which I think is something that a lot of more contemporary stories or contemporary attitudes when it comes to helping others forgets. So she's innocent, but she's not unwilling to learn.
And it must have been a lot more difficult when you couldn't just Google it.
Like, she's innocent, but she's not ignorant.
That's true. She does steal that spider's lunch, though, so that's kind of not fair.
She does, but that's a very childlike thing to do, isn't it?
About the spider, man. She doesn't think about this moral quandary. If she saves every fly from that spider, the spider's gonna starve. What do you do then?
Yeah, I mean, there is a lack of contingency or lack of continuancy with that point, because she saves the fly, but then she saves the snake, and she's talking about like, well, just because I don't like it doesn't mean it doesn't deserve help. But then it's like, well, okay, does the spider not deserve help? Where are you drawing this line? Inconsistent.
That's just my point about the inconsistencies in the moral standpoint of a 12-year-old. It's probably...
I would agree. But then, if you want to do deeper reading, I guess it's to do with the unconscious biases we have to work against as humans when it comes to caregiving. Like, it's easy to care for things that we like and think are cute and understand.
That's true.
Or that looks like an obvious victim, but I don't think in real life it's always so simple.
Well, she was talking about how this snake made her think of rebels specifically. She was sort of lining up all the animals to stuff she'd heard about. I guess somebody had tried to explain stuff about the war to her, and she was sort of matching it up with the animals that she found, and she sort of thought of the snake as that rebel. Like, I guess it was a comment on how even if a person is a rebel or whatever, we should probably still not let them die.
Yeah, it's that I always found this weird about war, where it's like, if you shot the enemy medics, then that's like not allowed against the rules. But killing people is okay. I don't know, it just doesn't make sense to me.
It kind of makes sense to me. It's like an honourable rule of engagement, almost. Like, you can fight your enemies, but it's like, for example, the rules governing how you should treat a prisoner of war. And like, you'd still expect someone to be treated with human rights, even if they were your enemy. It's why they're universal human rights, and why there are things like war crimes. Like, there still needs to be some level of governance, even in war.
I guess I just don't understand the notion of war in general.
Yes, we're lucky we haven't been having to live in one. What I like about this story is that I think her descriptions give it a sort of childlike wonder when it comes to the natural world and the flowers and the forest and the environment around her, which I think maybe is easy to overlook as an adult, but as a child, everything in the world is that exciting new.
Yes. I think this is something that's kind of gone out of fashion a little bit. Around this time, like, 19th century, there was kind of a push towards stories that kind of invoke this emotion of wonder. And Jules Verne did a lot of this, 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea and this kind of thing, where the main point of the story is to make you go like, wow, that's amazing, right? It's almost like imagery is in films now, where it's just supposed to be visually stunning. And we don't see much writing like that anymore. And I feel like that is the kind of thing that the story is trying to invoke. It's trying to give you that kind of feeling of this actually is quite beautiful and impressive. Do you see what I mean?
It sort of talks about how the world is a beautiful place, and not many stories take the time to really do that as much now.
Yeah.
No, I guess there's not the same sense of the pastoral or the idyllic. Like, we don't necessarily put all our wonder into the countryside anymore. I mean, it's coming back with the whole country core, people obsessed with living sustainably on cottages kind of thing. But I think the world is so urbanized now that even if you go into the country, it's not the same. Just
because we live in like the information age, like if you want to know how a certain species looks and acts, you can just kind of look it up, right? Most of the time. And I think that was kind of more of a sense back then that the world is like this massive and impressive place.
And you couldn't travel as much, so it would have felt bigger as well.
Yeah, and that's why that trying to invoke that kind of emotion works so well for a children's story, because it fits together, right?
I mean, it's also what children will first see. Like, I mean, I know we've talked a bit about the wonder of the natural world and not being able to understand it, but from a very simplistic perspective, it makes more sense to sometimes understand why animals do the things they do than why humans do. I think particularly within the context of a war.
She's trying to rationalise the war through her little animal hospital and what happens to her patients. Although it's not the same, it kind of introduces these concepts of life, death, healing, trauma. And yeah, like you said, all the needs of animals are very, like, it's basically food, shelter. They're all very kind of basic needs that every living thing needs.
Yeah, like you can understand that, like, bird with a broken wing better than my brother won't get off the sofa and I don't know why.
Yeah, exactly. So I guess we should talk about Louisa May Alcott. She was a really prolific writer. She wrote so much stuff. If you look at her Wikipedia page, it's really long.
For the time, yeah, I'll give you that.
I mean, I've been checking the Wikipedias for all the other authors that we're doing, and hers is, I'd say, pretty long.
Yeah. She wrote for a long time. Didn't she start when she was like 16, but she didn't really have any success for like 15 years.
Yeah. She wrote such a wide variety of things as well, from like thrillers to children's stories to romances. Like, her mind, amazing.
That's what I want to be, honestly. I think if you put me in a genre, I'd be upset. I want to write lots of different things. I kind of respect that.
I'd rather blend genres, but not necessarily try and write a different genre each time. Like writing a romance within a thriller setting, or like using fantasy to talk about horror or anything like that is kind of what interests me.
A lot of her thrillers she kind of kept under wraps, and it didn't come out that she'd written them until after she died, which I thought was interesting.
And I guess it wouldn't have necessarily been appropriate or considered appropriate.
They often had they were quite violent and passionate, which the impression I got from reading some things was that people would think them trashy. She seemed to find her footing writing children's stuff and had a lot of success doing that. I guess what's relevant to this story is that she was also a nurse. She intended to spend 3 months as a nurse, but her time was cut short because she got ill.
She got typhoid, right? But she seemed to recover. Although there are suspicions that they treated her with a compound which contained mercury, which then led to her death later on. So
it's not good for your immune system, and she did have problems with her immune system, I think.
Yeah.
Well, they had no idea about medicine back in the day. I think Sylvia Plath got a cold and they gave her opium drops.
Nice.
Wow.
Get high, have a cold.
Yeah, like it probably helped only because you were high. And like Edgar Allan Poe used to get sad throughout the entire winter, and it's like nowadays we'd be like, buy a sad lamp, you've got seasonal depression. Like he'd be all happy throughout the summer and writing lots, and then it would hit winter, and he'd be like, everything I've ever done is terrible.
I know that feel. Yeah, so while she was a nurse, she wrote an anthology called Hospital Sketches, which had a lot more serious stories in them, including ones about people essentially dying in hospital and things. So I think her time there had a really big effect on her, which probably influenced the writing of this story.
Yeah, you can tell her time as a nurse comes through in a lot of her writing. And she was the kind of person who used her own life experiences a lot in her stories. I think that's why they felt so real.
I do really like her writing style. It's just nice to read. Like, I read a few of her short stories and I found them all quite engaging. They use dialogue well, set the scene well.
Little Women made me laugh out loud at a time when I wasn't really laughing at books, so I was quite impressed.
Yeah, she's good at delivering humour. In one of the stories I read, the main character's at the beach with her auntie or her grandmother, I can't remember, one of her relatives. She runs off and the main character's like, oh no, are you okay? And she's lost her teeth in the water.
Oh, wow.
And a very kind gentleman comes to help them out. And that did make me laugh. That was a story called Debbie's Debut, which is about a lady who makes her great debut into society and struggles over which man to choose.
Oh no.
But it's a fun story. Sadly, it was about 10,000 words, so great.
It's too long for us.
Yep.
All right, if neither of you are going to say the quote from the interview, you know, we always seem to come back to this topic. I'll be the one who brings it up. Here's the line. She said, I am more than half persuaded that I am a man's soul put by some freak of nature into a woman's body, because I have fallen in love with so many pretty girls and never once the least bit with any man.
Wait, what?
That's what she said.
Huh.
Yeah, I think I did know the quote, but I didn't have it to hand, so thank you.
I don't know why every female author we seem to talk about. It's a big coincidence, is all I'm saying.
I'm not picking them on purpose.
I mean, I picked Mansfield, to be fair, but yeah. There is a strong correlation there, I think. I don't know if it means anything.
I mean, I imagine it's partially because if you were a heterosexual woman with children, you had less time to write back in the day, 100 years ago. Like, I'm sorry, but if you're too busy with the traditional female role, not to say that there aren't any good traditionally female authors, like I think, as the contemporary society proves, you can be a mother and a brilliant writer. It's just that I think at the time, if you're not given time, as Virginia Woolf may point out in A Room of Her Own, how are you going to be a writer? It takes a lot of time.
And childcare was a lot more difficult back then.
Yeah. And education was limited to certain people.
Well, Louisa actually took care of her sister's daughter for 8 years as well. So she did know a little bit about, I guess, mothering a child.
Yeah, I just meant like if you, not in the traditional sense of if you've got a household full of children and then you're expected to have dinner on the table for your husband by the time he comes home or manage the household or something like that, you're going to have less time.
That's true.
Particularly if you're like a working class woman as opposed to like upper class.
She was close to somebody that she based Laurie off of out of Little Women, I think.
Wasn't it basically everyone in Little Women based on her family?
Yeah, it was based on her own childhood growing up with 3 sisters, and she even wrote similar relationship dynamics between them as well.
I wonder how they felt about that.
Well, I think she did that because of kind of a lack of confidence. She didn't feel like she could imagine people who would feel real, so she used people from her life. But, I mean, it feels like it worked out pretty well.
I mean, it certainly gives them a sense of realness. Like, a lot of literary siblings don't behave like siblings, but the Little Women really do.
Yeah, I guess it's just write what you know.
I always adored Jo March as a character. Like, I know she's the popular one everyone loves, but also I loved her.
Yeah, I think Jo was the one that she used for herself, in case anyone doesn't know. I think it's pretty widely known, but just in case.
I mean, everyone loves Little Women. You seen how many times this thing has been adapted?
Yes. I've seen quite a few of them as well.
Like, even recently, they made a TV series in 2017, then there was a film in 2018, and then there was another film in 2019. Like, they just can't stop. It's everywhere.
It's very on topic at the moment, isn't it, though?
See, I thought maybe it was, but I'm struggling to see why.
Female characters who are both going against the established gender binary, but within a idealized American past, I guess, because it's a lot of American adaptations, or an idealized version of the past where period drama and things like that are a lot more in at the moment.
I think the fact that... Wait, now I'm questioning whether I remember the ending of Little Women.
What do you think the ending is?
Does Jo end up with Laurie or not?
No.
No, she doesn't. Good, that's what I thought.
Well, she marries some dude.
Not in the actual book, though, I don't think.
In the first book she doesn't, but I think there are sequels where she is married.
Yeah, well, I haven't read the sequels.
But yeah, my point was, because she doesn't marry Laurie at the end, even now that's kind of a surprise as an ending.
Because I love it, the fact that they've got such good chemistry and they're still not married at the end of it. Like, even now, that's novel. You don't normally get to have a dynamic between a man and a woman that is so electric without it being inherently, end goals, couple, or... Like, the fact that she said no to him despite all of that was amazing. And that it didn't diminish the dynamics they had because she didn't feel that way about him.
In a regular romance, she would have said yes.
Can we clear this up? Apparently there's it's because there's Little Women, there's part 1 and part 2, and sometimes they publish them together and sometimes they don't. And in part 2 she definitely gets married. It says so right here.
Okay.
Maybe I haven't read part 2.
Yeah, I think the book that I've read is up to part 1, which is where it ends with her father coming home, while the recent Greta Gerwig adaptation straddles both.
I haven't read any of the other ones. Like, she wrote about Jo's boys and liked the first one so much.
Yeah, I kind of don't want to read the others in case it ruins it for me.
I don't know, I just couldn't see Jo being married, but maybe I should give it a chance.
I mean, I can't see her being married. Yeah, we all read into characters, and I liked it because I was a tomboy writer, so I didn't know about the lesbian thing with Louisa May Alcott. It makes sense in hindsight, but for me, it was more having a female character who wasn't inherently romantic meant a lot because it had the intense friendship dynamic. Well, there was the pressure for romance, so it had that tension between the adult world demanding romance of you and the not wanting that, which was very resonant to me as an asexual teenager, where suddenly everyone was demanding romance of you. And you hadn't quite decided. You were just like, but I still want to play imaginary games with my friends. I want to write novels. Why is everything suddenly changing? Why can't I be friends with this person without everyone saying, oh, yeah, you must really like him. Why don't you kiss him? Oh my god, are you dating? No, shut up.
Yeah, that's basically what it is to be a teenage girl. You cannot even look at a boy before everyone's like, do you fancy him? Do you fancy him? But do you fancy him, though?
Excuse me. I would like to amend that statement. That's how it's like to be a teenager. I assure you it is exactly the same, or roughly the same from both sides of the fence.
Okay.
All right, that's it for this week. Thank you for listening. As always, you can find all our stories and previous episodes on our website at theshortstoryworkshop.com. If you'd like to contact us, you can do so via Twitter. I am at MattBWriter, Mel.
At Figureaholic.
And Simone.
E_M_typewriter, also known as the modern typewriter.
Perfect. Thanks again for listening. We'll be back with another story next week. Goodbye.